Well, this week was Kathy Hochul's turn, the first woman elected governor of New York, delivering her State of the State address to a joint session at the state capitol. It was nice, she joked at the top, to see actual people in seats this year. The Democrats sounding an optimistic note as she outlined major policy objectives, from dramatically expanding housing construction to adding 1,000 new mental health beds to revisiting controversial bail reform. On housing, Hochul proposed 800,000 new homes within a decade. She called the shortage of affordable housing a crisis and said some counties are dragging their feet. Here's a clip.
Every single locality across the state will have a target for building new homes. Upstate, the target is for the current housing stock to grow 1% every 3 years. Believe me, it's very manageable. Downstate, 3% every 3 years. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Local governments can meet these targets any way they want. They can shape building capacity. They can redevelop old malls, old buildings, office parks, incentivize new housing production, or just update the zoning rules to reduce the barriers. But when communities have not made good faith efforts to grow, when proposed housing projects are languishing for no legitimate reason, the state will implement a fast-track approval process, because doing nothing is an abdication of our responsibility to act in times of crisis.
The governor also proposed something called Empower Plus, expanding aid for home weatherization and insulation to help cut residential energy bills. She proposed automatic adjustments to the state minimum wage based on the rate of inflation. And she wants to simplify aid for child care, raising income caps so many more parents qualify.
Only 10% of families who are eligible for child care assistance are actually enrolled. Now, it may be that it's the legacy of a system that was, by design, difficult to navigate. That has to change. Our plan will streamline and centralize the child care application process. We'll also expand more access to vulnerable families. We'll increase income eligibility for more families to be able to take advantage of this as their incomes increase. But also, we have to continue supporting our hardworking, unbelievable health child care providers who allow us all to get done what we need to do. They're indispensable, indispensable.
Governor Hochul said state college tuition may have to rise, but income tax rates will not. Democrats hold the majority in both the Assembly and the state Senate. Reaction now from a Republican senator who represents Northern New York's North Country. We asked about Hochul's plan to really push for more housing.
I agree that there's an issue, and there's an issue across the state and frankly, probably across the country. But in New York State, it's not just an urban issue. Representing the Adirondacks in the North Country for the last 10 years as I have, I've heard that in every community, where second home buyers have come in and displaced locals, certainly shrinking our access for human resources. There's just fewer people there, to provide all the services that are needed, emergency services, police services, because they're getting squeezed out by second home buyers or vacation rental by owners. So that's an issue everywhere. And the affordability issue is a very real one too. I've heard countless stories over the years about that. While I agree that there's an issue, certainly I start to part ways with the governor on her approach here, and that she's going to just solve this problem by mandating or encouraging that every community build more houses. This is a market problem and it needs a market solution. And the problem is that I think that she's addressing symptoms and she's not really addressing the root cause of what's going on here. We have an affordability problem because we don't have enough supply, and we don't have enough supply because it's very expensive to do business in New York. Labor is expensive, energy is expensive, taxes are expensive, the regulatory environment adds expense, and so then housing becomes a very expensive thing to construct. So you've got a lot of people that aren't building houses because they're not going to make money on it. Subsidizing this is a short-term solution. You can't subsidize. I mean, that's just an artificial way. It's a market problem, and I'd rather see us acknowledging that we have a cost problem in New York State and trying to lower costs, whether it's taxes or a regulatory environment. I mean, getting insurance, especially in the construction business, is very expensive in New York.
Well, do we have a local opposition and local zoning problem as well?
Well, you're going to have that too. I mean, my background before I was in the legislature, I was in town government in Queensbury, which half of it's inside the park, half of it's outside the park. Mm-hmm. So I'm familiar with what the APA and the park rules do to local construction issues, and certainly I can tell you that local communities want to have control over what their communities look like. So when the governor starts talking about, I'm going to step in and supersede your zoning, and that was talked about a couple of years ago when they wanted to allow mother-in-law apartments, if you will, or these sub-unit adds on to residential properties, again, against what local zoning would say, because they were looking to address that. Local governments strongly opposed that, and I think rightfully so. So again, the idea I'm going to mandate my way out of this and ignore the realities of the economics of the problem, I think is not going to be effective.
All right. What about this this plan she calls the Empower Plus to help lower income residents, and you have a lot of them in your district, weatherize their homes? We have old housing stock everywhere, it seems, in the Northeast, and it came with a proposal to ban the sale of new fossil fuel heating equipment by 2030, which is just 7 years away. What was your take on either of those?
Well, 213 members of the legislature and the governor, I think I may be the only one that has any actual experience in electrical power generation and distribution. I was in the Navy's nuclear power program for 8 years. I have an engineering degree. And so, I can tell you that just, again, a stroke of the pen and mandating that we're going to meet some sort of artificial timeline that's picked by somebody that doesn't have experience in this or knowledge of what are the realities here, that we are going to abandon and decommission existing natural gas and energy infrastructure.
Biggest applause line was her proposal to index the minimum wage to inflation. Without a vote from you guys.
I could tell you, my side of the aisle wasn't applauding that. Again, I think realism starts to escape the room when you start talking about that. We're already at a competitive disadvantage with other states, and we are seeing people leave New York State, flee New York State for better economic opportunities elsewhere, whether it's a business owner that says, I can't afford to run my business here, or employees that are chasing jobs that are leaving the state. People are leaving because it's too expensive.
One last question about bail reform, been controversial up here, as you well know. She said she's open to some kind of, readdressing this issue.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how anyone could say they're not open to it. Although, if you started asking some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, there are many of them that will defend it to the teeth. But, certainly, I think the Governor Cuomo, I think, a couple of years ago, failed to mention it at all in his State of the State address, which shocked me. So at least she mentioned it. And there's, I think, a few simple things that can be done. If somebody says, well, no one wants somebody sitting in jail for lack of bail money because they stole a loaf of bread from the grocery store. I think we all agree with that idea. However, that is not what the law as written does. The law as written allows people that commit violent crimes to be immediately released without bail, and they're recommitting crimes. So I think really what we need to do is we need to give judges more discretion to consider the risk to public safety when they have bail decisions. And there is a list of crimes that bail is by law not allowed to be considered. So just go through that list, and and I'll help them. It's not that complicated. The list isn't that long, but you can start lining out crimes that are currently not bail eligible and make them bail eligible again. So the tweaks that need to be done can be fairly simple ones. If she wants to do that, I suspect that we will see some sort of movement on bail reform, enough where others will be able to say that they've done bail reform and they'll check that box. So I think it'll be the check the box exercise. I don't necessarily, I'm going to hold my breath that it's going to be meaningful change, but we're going to continue to fight for it because we have seen an increase in crime because of these cashless bail laws, not only in New York State, but across the country.
State Senator Dan Steck from the 45th District representing Northern New York. Thank you very much. Appreciate
Thanks
your
for having
time.
me, Stuart. Yep. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Veteran New York political analyst Ron Saib was watching Governor Hochul's State of the State as well, and we asked for his take and about the vitriol that quickly followed from Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. Joining us now, Ron Saib. He's a political analyst at Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs. Welcome back to NBC5 In Depth.
Thank you, Stuart. Always enjoy talking to you.
Well, and we to you. What is your read on Governor Hochul's State of the State? How ambitious did it sound to you?
It did sound ambitious to me. I think at one point she even said, "I've given you a lot of programs," and I think that's right. I mean, her priorities, I think, were very clear. She really wants to foreground questions of criminal justice, also affordability. I think the plan for mental health care was one that, if not surprising, was certainly one that I don't think was something that had been talked a great deal about before to try to address what is a mental health crisis, not only in New York State, but around the country. So I think she was pretty clear about her priorities, and she is a political leader who I think is very much policy oriented and programmatic. So probably not a great surprise there.
And with housing, which struck me, she sets out a goal of 800,000 new housing units across the state in 10 years, but she's going to lean on communities that don't sort of get with the program. And it also struck me that governors of every party are screaming about the lack of affordable housing.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that you make, that she's going to be setting targets for localities and counties in terms of building housing and affordable housing in particular. And as you said, if they don't make a good faith effort, the state will be going in there to intervene. She was very, very critical of so-called land use restrictions. Didn't sound a lot like a Democratic governor there so much. So I think that's an interesting part of this, where you said really sending a very clear message to localities and municipalities that if they do not address the housing crisis, the state will be coming in and addressing it for them. And I thought, just in a larger context, when we think about the way that government is working right now, there's so much emphasis on devolution, giving more power to localities and counties. This seems to be a bit of a reversal to it, almost going back to the old Democratic Party of Lyndon Baines Johnson, of trying to run more things from the center.
Governor Hochul has a Democratic majority in both the Assembly and the Senate. We spoke with the North Country Senator Dan Steck, who took issue with many of her policy proposals. But we also heard from Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who is a central figure now in the Republican majority in the House of Representatives. She took dead aim at Hochul, and I want to ask you about her statement. We'll put some of it on the screen, using sort of that same campaign language. Capitalized corrupt Kathy Hochul, far left failure. Certainly the most strident criticism. What do you think? Is this just sort of the continuation of the campaign style, kind of schoolyard nickname stuff?
Yeah, it seems like that. There used to be a distinction made by many politicians. I think George H.W. Bush was one who was most prominent in making the distinction between campaigning and governing. Campaigning was take the gloves off. You have to go negative, and the conventional wisdom has always been in order to be able to define your opponent. But once the campaign was over, you understood that you needed to build cross-party coalitions. You needed to be able to govern effectively. That was the only way to govern effectively. We're certainly in a new political moment of hyperpolarization. And I think that what Elise Stefanik's statement indicates is that two things in my mind. One, she's continued to emulate Donald Trump's communication strategy. That press release that you just showed on the screen has many of the elements of a Trump tweet, with the capitalization, the ad hominem attacks, those sorts of elements, but also just really not any appetite to work across the aisle. I think that actually can be a pretty smart electoral strategy, because I think where we are right now in terms of the Republican and even Democratic based voter is that to work with members of the other party is almost seen as treachery. It's seen as a violation of your principles, that you're no longer a pure conservative, pure liberal. So there's a real cost now to bipartisanship electorally. It's a shame that it's seeping into governing, because it is the case that if you talk about at least Stefanik's situation in the House of Representatives, Republicans have such a thin majority, as was demonstrated by the battle over the speakership, where Kevin McCarthy could only lose 4 votes from his own party if he was to become speaker, that getting Democratic votes can actually be advantageous, at least from a policy-making point of view. So I think it's not a surprising statement from Representative Stefanik, and I do think it indicates, as you suggested, that we now have this merging of campaigning and governing, or better stated, perhaps the superseding of campaigning over any kind of desire to govern effectively.
Ron Saib, political analyst with Skidmore College, Saratoga. Great pleasure to have you back on.
Oh, it's always a privilege and pleasure, Stuart. Thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. We have posted the State of the State address from Albany and last week's from Montpelier online at mynbc5.com.